the latest urban living webinar. Today, we are going to look at sustainable design and operations in the living sector. My name is George Sell. I'm editor of Urban Living News. We are an online B2B and events platform for the living and flex workspace sectors. Now, today's webinar is sponsored by Iterum. Iterum is a circular economy business specializing in appliance as a service. We have Chris from Iterum on the session today, and if you would like to get in touch with them and find out more, please drop him a line. We'll put their details in the chat. As you can see, some information here. Basically, the model is about supplying appliances to living sector operators, and it's a circular economy model. As I say, we're going to find out more about this from Chris, but if you'd like to get in touch with the company and find out more, please have a look at their contact details in the chat and go and have a look at the website. Today's webinar is going to last an hour. We'll have around 45 minutes of Q&A with the panelists, and then we'll save some time at the end for your questions. If you have some questions, please submit them as we go along using the Q&A or the chat function in Zoom. Everyone who's registered for this session will receive an email with a link to a recording of it in the next few days. So to give today's discussion a bit of context, just wanted to first show you some screen grabs from recent stories that we've run on Urban Living News, just to give you an idea of some of the kind of things that are going on in the sector. We've got NREP introducing an internal carbon tax to accelerate its net zero mission. We've got some of the big real estate companies like Hines setting net zero targets for 2040. Some are even sooner than that. I think NREP might be 2030. We're seeing the introduction of passive house architecture, which has traditionally been more of a house builder type product, into living sector asset classes such as PBSA. And we're seeing investors ramping up their spend on sustainability measures on their assets due to tenant demand, whether that's commercial or residential. And here are a couple of slides that really paint quite an alarming picture of the situation that we're facing and why today's topic is so important. When we get towards the end of the session, we're going to keep it open for a couple of minutes so you can take some notes from and copy and paste some of the stuff that's in the chat, but the links to the source of these slides will be in there. And I really think it's worth going and having a look. The one on the right shows the difference that a half a degree rise in global temperature makes to biodiversity and the specific effects it has on crop yields, plants, insects, and so on. And the one on the left, again, shows some of the various effects that could happen if the temperature goes up by a certain number of degrees. And it has different levels of where people think we are and where we're going to get to. It's sobering stuff, but it's important stuff, and I strongly advise you to go and have a look. So let's meet our panelists. We've got a great panel here. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves one by one, and we'll go from left to right as we see them on the slide. So first of all, good morning to you, Brent.
Morning, George. So I'm Brent Stojanovic, and I'm a co-founder and director of VervLife. We're a nationwide third-party operator of rental living.
Excellent. Thank you, Brent. Christopher, welcome to you.
Morning. Yeah, my name's Chris Wilson. I'm the Strategic Business Development Manager here at Iterum. So we're an appliances as a service business looking to reduce the cost and carbon associated with white goods, primarily in the build-to-rent, co-living and PRS sectors.
Thank you, Chris. Brendan, good morning to you.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Brendan Garrity. I am the Chief Exec of the Association for Rental Living. We cover the entire living economy, if you like, from urban build to rent to single family to co-living, not really PBSA, but in time we think local authority and any other part of co-living that or the living sector that may emerge. So we represent the industry, and we work to advance the living sector as best we can. We have best practice guides and a whole lot of manner of educational tools and spreading the word about the living sector.
Thanks, Brendan. And last but not least, and hot-footing it from Dublin Airport is Niamh. Good morning, Niamh.
Good morning, everyone, and nice to meet you all. I'm Niamh Waldron, and I'm ESG Director with Sigma Capital. We're the sort of fund behind our brand of Simple Life Homes. We manage 3 funds across London, the regions, and a mix of single-family homes and apartments, but mainly single-family homes. Across the portfolios, there's about 8,000 houses that we manage at the moment. And so all things people and the planet and how we operate in a local perspective is really important to us.
Thank you, Niamh. Okay, right, let's get stuck in. I want to start by talking about how engaged tenants are with sustainability. We saw on one of the context screen grabs there that investors are spending more on sustainable measures due to tenant demand. How engaged are tenants in the living sector? Is it an influencing factor in their choice of accommodation? Brent, would you like to kick off with that one?
So I think it definitely is an influencing factor. However, I would say based on our current insights into the occupational market, it isn't necessarily a driver of preference at the moment. Naturally, as salience and importance of sustainability, climate-based issues rises societally, that will, of course, I expect, unequivocally change over time. I think it's probably notable this morning, isn't it, that the Green Party, on this note, recorded their best ever election result, quadrupling their number of seats in Parliament, which I think probably signals my previous point. I think we've got to demonstrate a degree of pragmatism as well when we're talking about sustainability within residential property. The drivers for residents in terms of where they live and how they live fundamentally remain location and price based, particularly in the midst of a very keen cost of living crisis. However, having said that, residents are increasingly engaged and interested in sustainability. And I think we're seeing that show up now quite keenly in the way buildings and developers, are repurposing buildings, their build strategies, the building systems they're specifying within their buildings, the plant, how you generate heat in the buildings. So, for example, at VervLife, we manage and operate a large number of office to residential conversions in different cities, different markets across the UK. And we tell that story around repurposing really, really effectively in our marketing of these assets. I think we all know that the most sustainable means of constructing is not to construct broadly at all, it's to adapt standing assets and what's already available. And I think in a local market context where we are marketing and launching an office to residential conversion, there's some really interesting storytelling that can be done around that when it comes to helping residents choose where they live in a way which supports and aligns with their broader lifestyles and what they care about.
Thanks, Brent. Niamh, in the single family sector, it's a slightly different demographic from multifamily and co-living. How engaged do you think your customers are with the sustainability agenda? And
I totally agree with Brent. There's it's the sort of, we've got to keep in mind the practicalities of this and cost of living and how people want to live their lives. We do regular surveys of across our own residents, but also on a more national level. And yes, the willingness and the interest is there. And then the main things from our residents is things like accessibility to recycling, energy, measures in place within the house that they're buying. Those are the top ones when we ask them what sustainability things impact their choice. And I agree with Brent, it's not necessarily that will push them towards something, but if the house that they're going to live in is energy efficient, then that is a deciding factor on choosing it, if your energy bills are going to be lower. And we've done some research on that as well. I think the access to green space is also one of the ones that's really important. So those are the 4 that come up. So it's recycling, energy saving measures, access to renewable energy sources, but also access to green space, which ties in with the comments earlier about biodiversity and but I think it also ties in with everything else to do with sustainable living and living locally. It's the whole well-being, it's the whole community, it's how we all live our lives, but on a practical level as well. We did actually set up a membership program with a sustainable product company that people could buy into, a club. And lots of people were interested and lots of people signed up, but nobody actually bought anything from the company in the end, a few items. But because if I'm a family and I've got 3 children and I've got a choice between toothbrushes that are by bamboo and toothbrushes that I get, there's a choice that families have to make. So I think keeping a reality check on these things and being aware that we can't force people, but offering them all the alternatives and all the sort of messages regularly, but doing what we can. And we have regular meetings with our contractors, so our build contractors, the main ones, on how we can make and innovate. And I know that comes up later, but what can we do so that when they move into the house, actually the question has been answered for them. They're in a sustainable house as much as possible when you're balancing all the books, numbers and things.
So, Brent, it sounds like we're a way off the stage where tenants will be prepared to pay more to live in a building with a better sustainability performance. And we're starting to see that in people's travel and hospitality choices now at the higher end of the market. But I guess in the residential sector, we're not there yet.
I don't think we're quite there yet. Inevitably, generally speaking, change probably takes longer than people think more broadly. I think Niamh's point's a fantastic one. Look, fundamentally, sustainable buildings should theoretically and notionally at least be cheaper for residents to live in, particularly for energy efficient. So I think, again, when we're marketing assets to audiences, again, supporting that link between sustainability and perception of value is really important. A resident might be willing, probably, to pay a little bit more for their rent if they realise that their energy bills are going to decrease because of the sustainability and energy performance of the asset they're living in. It is improved. And again, quantifying that, writing that large is really important for operators when it comes to marketability and, of course, importantly, retention.
I was just going to jump in there, actually. I think one of the things to encourage and people to sign up to these things are there's some really good incentives out there. And I think, and we're in discussions at the moment with Octopus Energy on their zero bills home. And if you can show people that actually, if you sign up to this, you will have no bills as long as you live within, a reasonable way of behaving in a house. That sets a tone for people, and they go, well, okay, I know I'm not going to have to pay bills, and so I'm also doing something good for the planet. I think it's how we give the message to people rather than lecturing people, and that comes down to the education piece, how we tell people, what they're doing is right. I think, in Brendan, that education piece is something that we talk about regularly.
Niamh, sticking with you for a minute, as an investor, when you are looking at potential acquisitions of inventory, what is your sort of tick box like for a development?
I have a massive wish list. I have a massive wish list, but it comes back to Brent's point as well about the art of the possible and reeling me back in for, it has to balance. It has to be attractive to the investor. There still has to be the careful mind and eye on return of investment. There has to be an awareness of all of that. We could build houses tomorrow that were all net zero, that were all whistles and bells, but nobody would be able to afford to live in them. So we do have to make sure. Now, there are certain things, the sites that we look at will be brownfield, so there'll be regen sites. We build new, so we don't retrofit, but we are regenerating land that wouldn't necessarily be otherwise used for anything. So we're building up those communities. The things that I specifically in my role look for are how we can engage within the community to enhance the sustainability of that wider community, and also the biodiversity element of it. We've got a couple of wonderful little clips where we're in an area and we've teamed up with local members of the community who are using green space to grow food. Fantastic. There's so many messages there, and it doesn't cost a lot to do it that way. You know, to act, and you're getting the message out there to everybody. You're actually educating from a very base level, which then hopefully will grow, well, not hopefully, it will grow to that, you know, that awareness and desire to, well, actually, I'd like to live in those places.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Brendan, there are a lot of accreditation schemes in the sustainability world. We've got BREEAM, LEED, we've got energy performance certificates and so on. What role do you think they play, and how do investors and indeed consumers use these in their decision-making processes?
I mean, I think before I answer that question, I just want to add a comment to what's been said already. I think we're in a huge cultural war. And what I mean by that is not an aggressive, violent war. I mean a cultural change. We have, on the one hand, sort of the carbon initiatives, which are technically based and to some extent are easier to do because it either uses a lot of carbon or it doesn't. And you know, the guys at Iterum are kind of low energy kit going into homes, and technology at all levels is really, really important. But the really critical element is the cultural change around people. And you mentioned holidays and flights and that. So we're seeing, you know, everybody's aware now of the need to reduce flying time and all the rest of it. But the airline industry produces 5% of global carbon, and the built environment produces 40%. You know what I mean? But once it becomes a consumer issue, then we get traction and stickiness, and something that you mentioned as well, Brent. So I think that the green agenda is slowly but surely becoming a consumer culture issue, and the more that it does so, the understanding of how we need to live differently, rather than, well, I pay more for a bamboo toothbrush, is one element. Actually, how do I live differently and how do I behave differently is the much more important piece in all of this. And I think that we need to really recognize that, because the capital markets are greening quite rapidly now, and consumer markets are greening, and the development world is going to be sandwiched between these two forces, and they'll really need to respond rapidly and deeply to that. So to your point on all the badges are important because they set the benchmarks for how we are performing. And there's a lot of variety there. BREEAM being a very important one, of the kind of a UK standard that we use. It's pretty tough. You've mentioned Passive House. I personally I think Passive House is too myopically about carbon and not about living and behavior. There's post-construction badges that we get. All of these things are important, but we mustn't put the cart before the horse. At the end of the day, the assets that we create, the buildings that we create, can perform and are an engine for reporting on carbon or some aspects of ESG, as much as they are engines for creating revenue in the return for investment. But it's the behaviors in the building that matter. You can have the most green building in the world, but if the occupants don't use it properly, you've wasted your time and you've wasted your money. So the badges are important. They're a little bit confusing, to be honest, and they're certainly not consumer friendly, with the exception of EPCs. So I would argue that EPCs are the only consumer friendly certificate. But the science in the EPC is so limited that they're not giving a true story. So I'm working with a few people who are thinking about how we might change that, what might need to be done to do that. So I would argue around we need to have the right badges for the right audience. BREEAM is right for design teams and people who are doing the heavy lifting of building a building. Investors, there's GRESB and very others out there, and Neighbours, I think, is the best one, but it's not for residential yet. They will need to understand how it relates to them. But consumers, I mean, where do they go? They go to EPCs. It's put on white goods and it's put on many other things. It's understood as a marker of some order, but it's limited. It needs to be expanded, and we need more consumer badges than we need technical badges. It would be my view.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. You've preempted about 3 of my following questions in that answer, and the first one we're going to touch on is the greening of the capital markets, the financial markets. And Niamh, I wanted to ask you if you can give us some insight into whether the cost,
whether that's working, and that is actually why my hand went up, because in response to what Brendan was saying, the EPCs, yes, are something that we know are there and we all look at, but we also know are not effective in what they do. But they are what the banks are using to decide whether your green loan is going to go through or not. And I was fascinated by that, because I was thinking, but we all know that those aren't the best way. And I think this comes back to Brendan's point, there are so many platforms out there for you to pick and choose which one you're going to go on, which is suitable for your asset class, because I've had many discussions, GRESB, because it's actual operational data. How you get that data is really difficult in single family homes. I can't go around and ask every single person what their measurement was. We're trying to do it at the moment. We had looked at getting meters in per unit. The cost was just didn't add up. It just wouldn't have worked. So now there are platforms coming in where they can pull it directly from the grid. But now I'm being challenged on the GDPR. So I think there's so of how we're grabbing that, how you're legally doing it. And I think going back to Brendan's point, that sort of not standardization, but something that's easily understood by everyone, something that makes sense to everyone, and something that's achievable, and realistic. I personally, one example, if we have 8,000 houses and let's just say for argument's sake, 25% of them are 2-bedroom, 25% of them are 3-bedroom, and 50% are 4-bedroom. It won't be that way. But if I do a pilot across the country of 10%, 20% of actual data on those, bearing in mind the cost is a huge element, surely we should be able to then extrapolate from that and estimate most people who live in a 2-bedroom will live in a particular way, give or take, some sort of level of living. Most people who live in a 3-bedroom and at least allow us to make some estimates of how our homes are operating as a stepping stone to, right, now there's a platform that's achievable for everybody to get the information. Because I think, GRESB didn't work for us, and I discussed it with GRESB, and they accepted that and understood. There's elements of BREEAM, because we buy after what gets handed over to us afterwards. So it's BREEAM in use we need to be looking at. And it's like this minefield, and then you go, right, I've got one. And then you go to the legal team and they go, whoa, we need to know exactly what you're doing. And you go, no, please. So I think exactly that, as Brendan was saying, let's find things that work and make it simple and easily understood for everyone. Brendan.
And sorry, I'll come to you in a second, Brendan, but Niamh, you mentioned that the banks are predominantly EPCs as their benchmark. Is the financial advantages of being able to jump through these hoops and prove that you are green, in inverted commas, is that making the cost of development finance significantly cheaper, or is there not that much?
Not yet. No. And my feeling on it is, if you sign up to that, then you've got to then continue to prove and improve. And if things don't work out your way, how is that going to work? I don't think it's clear yet. And I don't think anybody is clear yet, because to work out carbon based on the EPC carbon score is just madness. But it's all we've got. So
yeah. I went to an interesting presentation earlier in the week, actually. A guy from Euratseo, quite a big real estate investor, and he described their policy as ESG beyond certification, because he was saying certification can be tweaked and you can opt for various ones to get around certain things. He also said they are doing very little acquisition of stranded assets, because the cost of upgrading them to comply with where they need to be is intense and getting heavier. So Chris, I want to come to you now and ask about the capex cost of retrofitting these poorly performing buildings. Is it prohibitive? Is the cost coming down as economies of scale improve? Where are we at with that?
I think the first thing really to acknowledge is, are we actually delivering retrofit at scale at the moment? And I don't really think the answer is yes. I think if we look at the public sector, London's retrofitting homes 10 times slower than they need to be to hit net zero by 2030. I mean, in the first year of the social housing decarbonisation scheme, they only did about 150 homes, and less than 5% of the funding that was available was actually used. So anyone else that's worked on large scale government projects will know how slow they are to get moving. So it could be an aspect of that. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that actually picks up over the next few years. We've got a huge skill shortage as well. I mean, there's only a handful of passive accredited coordinators around London. So in terms of scale, I don't know where we're at with that. But if we think of retrofit as really just being a new term for sustainable refurbishment, something that the industry has actually been doing for a number of years, albeit a lot less consciously. So a lot of the construction methodologies that are applied to retrofit are similar to what you'd see across the sector anyway, and some of the materials that are being used are similar to those that would be used in a more sustainable development. So I think we're kind of already hitting those economies of scale from that aspect. But in terms of innovations, obviously we'll see technology is developing, and we've seen a result of this reduction in cost. Look at heat pumps and solar and how much more affordable that's becoming. I think now with the new Labour government, we'll probably start to see some stricter standards for energy efficiency. So it's going to be higher quality retrofitting when it comes into place. And this might initially drive up some of the costs, but I think over a long term, it will foster a more competitive market. So I'd expect to see that drop down further. And if you've been at any of the trade shows in the last 5 years, you'll see a gradual increase of sustainable building materials coming to the front. Again, I think as we get more accurate with reporting from an investor standpoint, we're going to see the number of those probably dwindling away a little bit. But yeah, I think the other thing to note regarding CapEx is obviously we operate off a lease model, so virtually no CapEx regarding that. And I think it'll be interesting to see if other aspects of the build look to adopt a similar model, especially things that would be due an upgrade in 5 or 10 year periods. So I think that's an interesting thing to look into.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Brent, you mentioned earlier in the session that you are operating several assets that have been repurposed. Is there a broad type of building that is suitable and others that aren't? I mean, offices do send, the office to resi movement does seem to be building momentum, but I'm guessing it has to be a very specific type of office with a suitable floor plan to make it work.
Indeed. Yeah. Oh,
yeah, I think that's precisely right, George. Offices can work well, but again, from experience of working with investors and developers, advising, guiding, and consulting on such projects, right, you probably need to look at 80 offices to find 3 or 4 that actually fundamentally, from a design point of view, you can work with when it comes to converting to a residential asset, for example, are the floor plates deep enough, so on and so forth. So I think when from a developer's lens, I think it's hard work up front, hard work generally, but I think again, when it comes to development and construction more broadly, retrofitting where it makes commercial sense and where it's adding value to local markets and to the nation more broadly, as a means to revive town centres, suburban environments, it is a force for good ultimately.
Yeah, Brendan, the build to rent sector has predominantly been about new builds, with a few honourable exceptions. I toured Balfron House on your ARL study tour recently, which was fantastic, but that's very much in the minority. Do you think we're going to see an increase in velocity for repurposing projects?
I think it's inevitable, but as Brent was saying, not all buildings are suitable. And unfortunately, in construction, we do not have a legacy of quality. So you're not just looking at an asset that's really well made, and all you have to do is get it up to the green standard that you want. Very often there's skeletons in that cupboard, you know, and that costs money to fix. So, you know, one of the most important things to recognize in this agenda, the sustainability agenda more generally, but construction, is that there's no silver bullet. The silver bullet culture that has existed predominantly, you know, I'll buy the badge and I'll be fine. That's one of the, if we're going to target something, that's what we should be targeting as a real cultural change. We have to look at everything simultaneously and all the time to unravel this piece of string, which is very tightly bound, to see what are the bits that can be attended to. So there's, you know, silver bullet approach is going to be very, very, it's not going to deliver the value that we need. And it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. I mean, 50s, 60s, and 70s office buildings are good candidates for office to resi conversions for a whole host of reasons. Often the infrastructure is quite good. The floor plates are quite narrow. Some of them were built before air conditioning, so they relied more on natural ventilation. There wasn't all of the gubbins that goes with it. And as we got into technology solutions, our floor plates got deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until we had them so deep that they didn't even have any natural light. And now we know that that was a terrible mistake. So what we do with these buildings is going to be another matter. So some architects that I work with are quite innovative. They'll say, well, we'll put resi on the outside because we can get natural light. And then perhaps on the inside, it might go to storage or it might go to logistics or something like that, so that the deep plan part can be used for something that needs darkness or doesn't need light. And the light side of the building could be used for something else. So there are some very clever and innovative minds at work speculating on solutions. But turning that into a deliverable project, quite frankly, you know, and again, it's the day after the election, the governments historically have focused on demand side stimulus. We need supply side stimulus. We need to make it easier for offsite construction. We need to make it easier for the supply chain to deliver more homes. We need to make it easier to use the land that we've got to create the homes that we need. And then when we use the EPC standards, they need to be expanded because it is understood by consumers as just narrow in its application, but use those really important tools that are in place rather than force. You know, we've got to really use what we've got to advance the cause. So yeah, I think there's going to be another wave of it, but I think it's going to be harder than it was the first time for a whole bunch of reasons, but it's still doable. You know, and I think to Chris's point, technology and scaling technology is really the solution. You know, I know we're getting air source heat pumps. They have an applied use, which is a window, and in that window they work very, very well. But we don't really have scalable solutions. The most recent one is photovoltaics, and that's only because the Chinese got involved with manufacturing. What other scalable solutions other than, you know, than your white goods that you might supply, Chris, or air source, you know, air fryers who use less energy than an oven? I mean, we don't have a lot of options, not really. We really have to invest in our technology that will enable some of these things to take place and some of the existing assets to be repurposed in an effective and cost-effective way, you know?
On that subject, Brendan, and Chris alluded to some of the construction industry trade shows earlier and the plethora of new products that are out there. Is there anything just around the corner in terms of building materials or techniques that is going to make building efficient assets easier or quicker or cheaper? Are we on the verge of anything exciting, or is it just refining what we've already got?
Well, again, I go back to my multiple factors simultaneously. So we have various technologies that can be deployed. CLT, cross-laminated timber, is technically shown that could be, you know, it could be a great source of renewable material for all sorts of buildings, including very tall buildings. The insurance world is cautious, and understandably so. And so we have technology slightly ahead in that regard, but we have an insurance world which is going to come slowly to a fuller acceptance of that, and it is happening. There are very slow moves to accepting a wider use of that sort of technology, and hopefully that will accelerate and that will provide solutions. I'm working with a chap from Imperial College looking at reducing carbon in concrete, one of the biggest polluters. Now, we will not get away from using carbon, But if we can reduce the carbon from using concrete, rather, if we can reduce the carbon content in concrete, we could save many trillions of tons of carbon going into the atmosphere. So again, it's a little bit of a marginal gain play on some levels, and there's a much more strategic interventionist play on other levels. The truth is we need both.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. Neve, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just some of the points that Brendan was making about supply chain. I think one of the important things for me is regular engagement and discussion with our construction partners on, what are you doing? Can we visit? How can we pilot it to see if it will work, to alleviate the fears of insurers or investors or whoever it is, or to demonstrate that things are actually working. Right down at the moment, Vistry have a lovely innovation house within their MMC factory, and that's where they test out things ahead of, and you can go and have a look. And I'm actually going down next week to have a look at the brick slips. The things you learn when you're an ESG director coming from education is amazing. Brick slips, and what do they actually mean? What will they look like? How easy are they to install? And in the innovation house, they've had the windows fitted within the frame to then transport. So there's so many things that we can be doing, but we need to be testing them and demonstrating, and we need almost people to buy into. On every development, there must be some sort of innovation test going on somewhere. We insist on other things. Well, why can't we insist on that? And on Chris's point about somebody mentioned PV panels, they're the natural things surely to have on a circular economy going. I know that in however many years' time, my panels are going to need redoing. By then, my building warranty might be out, but they've got to come out of the tiles on my roof. So what's going to happen then? So there's a lot of things that are coming our way that we need to be thinking about now. And I think that ongoing dialogue, visiting, talking, testing, because, if you test and it doesn't work, then at least you've tested and you've proved it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think if I can just add as well, there's a sector challenge I think we all need to come together to unlock here, which is, and there are advantages, but also very clear disadvantages to this. As a sector, we're obsessed with precedent. So I think when it comes to innovation, some of the things Neve was talking about, it's incumbent upon all of us to take the ball by the horns, particularly when it comes to sustainability and ESG, because we all know how important this is on a planetary and human level, actually. So I think there's a lot more we can do across the sector to sponsor innovation, to give it the bandwidth, and to make it permissible.
Yeah, I think that collaborative piece. I was in education before I was in this, and it was always that little. I was in private education. Don't shoot me for it. But your little enclave was, this is our school. Let's not, that sharing thing. Just be careful that you're going to competitors and what there's. We're all offering something different. The houses we built are different to the houses that other people build. The product that we're providing is different to the product that others are providing. So collaboration isn't a negative thing. It's actually a positive thing, because we'll all move forward if we collaborate and share. It's competition in a positive way, not in and I think we need to, I totally agree, Brent. We all need to get together and go, right, let's go for this big time. Let's not just do little bits.
Well, when you look at that against the background of global warming and the climate crisis, then, collaboration is desirable, it's essential, if we're going to do what we need to do. Yeah. Let's go back to operations for a minute. Brent, you mentioned, I think it was you who mentioned earlier, that you can have the greenest building in the world, but if the tenants aren't using it appropriately, then all the expense and all singing and dancing materials aren't going to make any difference. What is the operator's role in engaging and educating the end user to get the best performance out of an asset?
So I think fundamentally it's about education, clearly, and it's about understanding your role as an operator. Again, I would always come back to, yes, of course, there are things that every good operator worth their salt should be doing when it comes to how they take custody of their assets, how they engage their residents, and how they guide their clients when it comes to matters such as what building technologies to install within the building, how to develop the building through efficiency and for sustainability best practice, leading practice. But ultimately, we're dealing with residents who are their own discrete individuals at liberty. So I would say it's always incumbent upon them as humans to do their bit as well. Yes, as an operator, it's really important, for example, that we're drafting and enforcing really, really robust, comprehensive fair use policies. We're educating residents on why that fair use policy is in place. But again, it's for residents' own lookout, I would always posit, to do the right things and exhibit the right behaviours. I think as an operator, it's really important, again, to support residents' understanding of sustainability within their building and what that means, how it operates, how it's designed, how it was constructed. But also, in our experience, it's really, really useful, value-adding and engaging for residents to take them out of the building. So what I mean by that is, when you're drafting your resident cultural programming and events calendar, some of the things that have worked really, really well in our communities are TED Talks on broader sustainability matters, TED Talks on diet, TED Talks on, Brendan touched on this earlier, travel choices, in multifamily and in co-living, and of course in SFR, where the scope for residents events is a bit more limited because of the fundamental nature of the typology. You can deliver culture and events in SFR, but probably more of a focus for obvious reasons in multifamily and co-living. Generally, these are professional people. Within their 9 to 5s, they will have a need, a requirement to be clued up on sustainability, on ESG. So, if you can provide a resident with, an hour or an hour and a half's free CPD, every month on sustainability, climate, in whatever way, shape or form that comes via your cultural program, then they're probably going to attend. They're going to support that. So I think that's always a really, really, really good thing to do.
And is this information communicated usually via apps, via resident apps, as well as events?
Absolutely, yeah, and on our resident app, there's repositories for information on some of our resident apps. All of our resident apps are white labeled for individual clients and individual communities. Some of the apps now, which is something we're guiding upon, include a section on green or sustainability. So all of the resources available to the resident in this topic area are focused and concentrated in one central point, keeping it a little bit more simple and easy for them to navigate.
Thanks.
Can I jump in there? Sorry, I know I didn't put my hand up. Brendan, after you, Brendan. Okay. Just on some of those points on Brent, I think putting people at the heart of everything and that communication piece is really important, but equally challenging them on their behaviors. I mean, one of the big things for us is we report back on the recycling that's happened. I will put news, we'll put it in the app. We'll share good news stories on sustainable activities within our resident bodies so that others can see. And we do activities. I know we have the bulk of our communities are single family homes, but we do an awful lot of activities that involve everybody and that people can all get involved in. So I think if we can keep the communication lines open, but ask our residents as well, engage with them, because if they come up with the ideas and if they come up with the solutions to the ideas, and if we follow up, they said we did within realistic terms, those things then actually grow arms and legs and other people buy into it. I think that's the important bit. Sorry, Brendan.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that, we are already subject to the Building Safety Act, which is a profound piece of legislation in as much as Dame Hackett has somehow effectively created significant cultural change through legislation only, and that's no mean feat. But one of the aspects of that golden thread from the initiator of a project right down through to the operators and the residents is to demonstrate and articulate that everybody has a role to play and everybody has a responsibility and everybody is on the hook. Now, in build to rent land, I know from the application of that act within our members, the resident engagement on building safety is proving very tricky and challenging because, first of all, I've never had to do this before. Why should I do it now? What are you actually talking about? I don't really understand what you're saying. And thirdly, do I really have to? How much time is this going to take? So the residents a little bit, I'm going to be a little bit sort of generalized here, they're a little bit kicking and screaming, coming to a statutory obligation. Not doing that is illegal. Now, they may not have been aware of that, but it is an illegal act not to participate and fulfill your part of your responsibility. So that's a huge that's a huge platform of change that we're trying to get our heads around, and it's tricky. But I always say to everybody, with 5% more thinking along exactly the same logics as safety, you could bring in all the sustainability stuff. So we're having to do it anyway. The residents are having to do it anyway. And we just added another layer of sustainability and the green agenda onto that. It's the same logics. It's the same buy-in. It's the same culture. So I suppose this is, to my mind, a very powerful lever that we need to pull carefully, but it's a potentially very powerful lever because we are all obliged to participate in it rather than how do I convince you to participate in it. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic to see unfold, but it is a powerful thing that we could potentially use to advance not just safety, but a culture of sustainability too.
Mm. I think as an operator, I think as an operator, building on Brendan and Neve's points, it's quite a fine line to tread in a lot of ways, communication around issues around sustainability and ESG-based issues, right? Because what you can't do is inadvertently or advertently getting to the territory of making residents feel shameful because they're not undertaking sustainability-based behaviours. That's obviously a no-go. However, as Neve said, which I would completely concur and agree with, what we need to do is to guide, is to educate, is to support residents to navigate what actually, for a lot of people, remains still to this day quite an abstract issue, right? Carbon's essential to all life on Earth, but based on how it's reported, you wouldn't necessarily know that. And I'm talking about headlines now, the man and woman on the street, the residents in our buildings. So quite often you have to start from ground zero, actually, when it comes to educating residents on these issues. Inevitably, some residents are more up on it than others, if you might say. But actually, I think again, it's about good PR, and this is why all operators should have a really, really strong grasp of reputation, of PR, and of fundamental human nature, right? So more than anything, it's about consistency, and it's about saying to residents, look, here's some data which helps you to understand how the building on an asset level, on a community level is processing its recycling. Here's some data which helps you to understand energy usage. What role can you play, and why should you play that role in making these targets and these scores better for the environment? So I think that's again important.
Yeah. Neve, I'll come to you in a minute. I just want to come to Chris for a second because one of Brent's points has prompted this, and I want to talk about the role of technology in enhancing sustainable operations. What is the role? And I'm talking here about both resident-facing technology and kind of back-end property management technology.
Yeah, I think, well, the adoption thus far has been really strong. And I think it's going to form a central aspect of most of the ESG strategies in now going forward. Like, if nothing else, from a compliance and reporting aspect, like, investors are going to need this data. I think we're going to see a shift in terms of predictive maintenance, IoT sensors becoming more readily adopted. And so this proactive approach is going to help improve efficiencies across portfolios. If you think, coming back to PV again, like, if a solar panel is dirty, it reduces performance by 25%, for example. So maybe that changes the way that an operation team looks to do their regular maintenance of solar panels if we know maybe we can stretch that to a 6-month cleaning period, or factor that in depending on how it's performing. And I think as the markets have shifted and operators are getting squeezed, I think it was Get Living at the Build to Rent annual conference said they're looking for marginal gains wherever they can across the board from a sort of operational efficiency. I think we need to look at it the same way, much as been echoed today, in terms of getting those marginal gains where we can from a sustainability perspective. Like, as portfolios are starting to mature, because obviously it's such an early market in the UK, really, with Build to Rent, we're starting to see the maintenance issues. And when it comes to proactive maintenance and preventative sort of work, I think that's going to be really welcomed by the operations teams. I think from our side, from a tech perspective, like what gets measured gets managed. And so when we've got data, we can lead with that data first and make those informed decisions. Like, this is also coming back to sort of the design side of things, seeing what actual usage of the spaces, like how are the tenants using these buildings? And we're seeing this in the decline of cinema spaces. I think it's going to be about informing the whole process using technology.
Thanks, Chris. Neve, I'll come back to you. I think you had your hand up earlier, and then Brendan, to you.
Yeah, I can't remember what my hand was up about at the time.
Okay, we'll come to Brendan then.
Yeah. So I just wanted to build on what Chris is saying. One of the changes that we're seeing in development more generally, but particularly in the rental market, but this is also happening in the sales market, is effectively the idea of sort of aftercare and post-construction management, which never existed in sales. You say, house is finished, practical completion. You buy the house, it's your problem. See you later. You know, even when you buy a pair of shoes from Clark's, I mean, you have some recourse to the mothership if your shoelaces break. You know, that just never existed as a consumer option in residential real estate. And what we're seeing, I think, being led by Build to Rent, but others are picking up on it, which is fantastic, is this idea of it's operational real estate. So we're seeing the rise of the operational brief and informing the CapEx brief. It was all about CapEx before. Now it's the dawn of OpEx is upon us. And within that operational brief are the sorts of things that, whether we use technology or more just base specification and materials, are going to have an impact on the performance of that asset from a return on investment perspective, but also from a sustainability perspective. So I'll give you a really simple example. Hiring somebody to push bins around because the architects put the bins in the wrong place is going to be jumped on. The other side of the coin is, you know, a material in the reception area that has to be cleaned, should be cleaned once a day. If it has to be cleaned 6 times a day, somebody's made a mistake somewhere, and that just costs money. But it doesn't just cost money. I mean, you know, if we don't have to use so much soap and so much water, as tiny a consequence as that is, times that by a 30-year life of a building, that is very, very, very quickly adds up. So it's really important that we use technology and specification and design and behavior to identify the very, very small stuff, as well as the very, very big stuff like carbon and concrete, and attack all of them. But technology will be the thing that actually proves the success. How many times did you clean? Only once a day. That means we saved 6 times that money on not just revenue or just cost, but also on materials. And I think it's really seeing that circularity come in at every single level is what we're seeing. It's coming. It just needs to accelerate.
Thanks, Brendan. Chris, what do you see as the main current barriers to more widespread adoption of various green practices, and how can the sector overcome them?
Well, I think there's a few. The primary one, really, funding. So we're already starting to see this really by investors setting net zero targets, the downstream impact of that it's having on designers, leading to meet the net zero buildings. Like, because of the nature of construction timeframes, the designers are designing a building 3 to 5 years before these goals need to be hit. Contracts are being exchanged with contractors. So irrespective of policy change, irrespective of if these goals get pushed back, like we see in every other sector, like the Tories withdrew last year, like, it's still happening. They're still getting built to net zero because of this downstream effect from funders. And Neve mentioned earlier on that preferential sort of lending rate isn't where it needs to be. And so it'd be great to see sort of that being unlocked, and maybe certifications are going to help encourage that. And if we look at the office sector, that's a prime example where they value assets higher, if they're achieving BREEAM outstanding because of the returns they're able to get from that. Obviously, we've talked to long extent that that's not there yet with the residential market. Obviously, we don't have the supply yet to give consumers that choice. I think it's going to be continuing to innovate as well, whether that's clean energy, it's across the board. Because BTR is in its infancy in the UK, we're still able to define the standards to some extent. And one of which I think we're being pretty good at is sustainability. We're very fortunate that Brent's on the call here. They're B Corp. They signed up to business declares. I know a lot of other operators are looking to follow suit in that respect. So I think we're doing a lot as an industry to try and better the sector. And then generally just taking a more long-term perspective about what it means to develop, like from a development cost perspective, I suppose, looking at whole life costing on a longer period. And part of that is building more future-ready buildings. Again, I think Build to Rent are doing pretty good on this, but it's not just smart enablement. It's looking at, are we actually building buildings that are suitable for maybe extreme weather, the impacts of climate change that we've got to design for as well. I mean, Part O guidelines, the one that deals with overheating, that's only 3 years old in the UK. So we're still very early in terms of like the UK building for warmer climate, and it's only going to get worse. So I think we need to remember that and keep adapting. I think everyone is collaborating pretty well. I'm sort of on the fringe of ACAN, Architects Climate Action Network. They're doing a lot in terms of sharing resources with one another. I think collaboration is going to be a key for this. I won't get distracted by policy because we can go around in circles blaming the planning system, but obviously leading with retrofit first. The city has already set that policy up. How that's going to be implemented yet, we'll see, I suppose. But yeah, I think policy is obviously going to play a key part, as is funding, because that's what's driving it at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's almost 12 o'clock, but just one quick question for you, Brendan. As we are in the morning after the night before, are you anticipating anything significant in terms of sustainability and environmental policy affecting the living sector?
I think we'll see a tightening of the regulations, and that's sort of on the cards already. What's important is that we need carrot and stick. So I think we'll see. We will be calling. In fact, we put a press release out today calling for, sort of support of the supply of homes just more generally. So there will be a tightening of regulations. I think the capital markets will still beat any regulations coming from market in terms of the ESG requirements of finance coming down from a top-down perspective. I do think we'll see an attempt to liberalize planning, but I think we must be mindful to note that throwing the planning system out is not going to help anyone. Properly resourcing it and allowing it to function effectively and restricting some of the bad habits that have crept in out of a perceived necessity are the things that we should address that are much lower hanging fruit. So I'm hoping there will be a liberalization of planning in some respects, but more importantly, a resourcing of planning. But we need carrot and stick here, and the regulations are the stick. The carrot, especially to the capital markets, with we've seen the loss of MDR recently. We've seen a number. Rent control is always looming as a threat. These things are going to do nothing to help the delivery of housing. Nothing at all, and not just rental or housing, any form of housing. So I hope this government will be thoughtful in the interventions that they make and realize that there's an awful lot of people in the industry willing to do an awful lot. We just need a bit of help from them, and so far it hasn't been coming.
Excellent. Thank you, Brendan. That's a good note to end it on. Thanks, everybody, for your contributions today. That was a fascinating conversation, and we could go on, but we've reached the end of our hour. I just want to show a couple of quick slides before we wrap up. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we'll keep the session open for a minute or two so you can take some notes of all the good stuff in the chat, including the LinkedIn profiles of our speakers, actually, if you want to carry on the conversation with them. So the Urban Living webinars are taking a summer break now. We'll be back in September on the 27th with a webinar specifically about co-living, which is a subject I'm particularly interested in. You can see the link to register for that in the chat. We've also got a resource of all our previous webinars. Again, you can see the link for the chat in there. We've done quite a few of these now on a very broad range of topics, and they're a good knowledge resource. So I would urge you to go and have a look at some of those. Our flagship in real life event, the Urban Living Festival, is taking place on September the 18th and the 19th. More information in the chat. It'd be great to see lots of you there. You can see some of the organisations we're working with there, including the ARL, who are a supporting partner. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. We've got a new venue, we've got much more space and much more content. It's going to be a great event this year. We're also introducing sector awards, the Urban Living Impact Awards, and entries for those opened the other day, actually, on July the 1st. So again, have a look at that and see if you've got a project or a deal or an individual who you think is worthy of entering. If you'd like to work with us at IHM, either on our digital or in real life events, contact my colleague Henry, whose details are on the screen and also in the chat. And finally, I just want to say thank you. Thanks very much to Chris and to Iterum for sponsoring the webinar today. I think it was a great conversation. Thanks also to Neve, to Brent and to Brendan for their great contributions. Thanks to you for watching. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you all around soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Hello, we are International Hospitality Media, or IHM for short. IHM is the #1 brand to engage with decision makers in hospitality and real estate. Our 4 multimedia brands lead their respective sectors with breaking news, comments, trends and opinion across a variety of multimedia solutions. We provide an inspirational community to connect people through world-class events, webinars, podcasts, award schemes and much more. But let us share our story of who we are and what we do. Over 10 years ago, Piers & George had a light bulb moment to provide expert opinion, comments and low-cost digital content. And so they went on a journey over the past decade, creating media platforms to serve the hospitality and real estate industries. We now have an engaged audience with a reach of over 60,000 monthly visitors across our website, 48,000 of our email database across all the sectors, and over 67,000 across our social channels. Everything we do believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. We make things simple and very easy to work with us. And we're a friendly bunch too. We offer creative solutions to help you achieve your business goals. Read, watch, listen, meet with IHM. Contact us for a chat today. Just look at some of the brands we have worked with recently.